Welcome into the Rauf Report. Today we're going to talk about Louisville, and not just because they beat Cal last night, which was their 18th victory in their last 19 games. It's an incredibly impressive stretch for Louisville. They're up to a projected sixth seed on the bracket matrix, which shows and reflects the amount of wins they've been able to accumulate in the last 2 or 3 months and how they've been playing, which is incredibly impressive, especially considering where Louisville has been the last 2 years. And Pat Kelsey deserves ACC National Coach of the Year recognition. Doesn't win the award, he deserves to be in all those conversations. He's done an incredible job, and this team has done a really good job getting to the point where they're at with 26 wins or 24 wins, excuse me, on the season, 24-6 overall. But I want to talk about Louisville from the standpoint of what we should expect from them in the postseason, in both the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament. Because it's no lie or not a surprise that the ACC is down this season. I've talked about it on this channel and on this show multiple times. I think it's a three-bid league, which is the lowest the ACC or the least amount the ACC would have ever gotten. Louisville has capitalized on that in a way that nobody else really has. There's a difference between the way Louisville played earlier in the season and the way Louisville has been playing in the ACC. And I think it is fair to wonder if we can extrapolate out the way Louisville has been playing during ACC play and conference play into non-ACC games. The reason being is that this was a team that had a new coach, had an entirely new roster, and was dealing with a number of injuries early on in the season. The guys who are contributing players for them now, some of them were not expected to be that early on in the season, but they've had to figure out what works based on the injuries, based on who is available, and also just based on this roster and coaching staff knowing what to work together. Reflecting of that, they were 7-4 in non-conference play this season. And from a T rank perspective, where Torvik ranked them in terms of efficiency metrics, they were 74th in the country. So outside the NCAA tournament picture, you could tell they had improved on where they had been the last couple of seasons, but they were playing more like a mid-tier ACC team. Right? They were below average nationally in both effective field goal percentage and opponents' effective field goal percentage, basically defense. Their offense was okay, not great. Defense was okay, not great. Still a major improvement. That was kind of what we expected this Louisville team to be based on how they performed in non-conference play. Well, in those 19 games in conference, Louisville has played like a top 10 team in the country, not just top 10 team in the ACC. This is comparison to how teams have done in their respective conferences, adjusted with those efficiency based on opponent strength and location, game location, everything like that. A top 10 team because they have played with a high level offense. They've played with, more impressively, an elite level defense, top 10, top 15 defense in the country. You can see the efficiency has improved. The effective field goal percentage, both offensive defense, has improved drastically. Rebounding has fallen off a little bit, but that has to do with the style of play and the fact that they don't have as many big men as I thought they would earlier in the season, and as they did have earlier in the season. But the wins above bubble metric, which is supposed to measure how a bubble team would perform against your schedule and your results, way up in conference play, and way, it was negative in non-conference play. This is, I think, perhaps Louisville's biggest strength to this point in the season, is where in ACC play they have not had the losses that make you really scratch your head by and large. I know there was one of them, but they have taken care of their business the way top teams typically do. You could argue how they've gone against the top competition in the league. They do have the win over Clemson, and they have a win over UNC, both of which are very, very nice. And I think are good indicators that perhaps this could translate outside of the ACC. But there is also something to be said for the fact that this is the team that simply took care of business against the lesser teams and all the weak teams in the ACC. We've talked about Wake Forest being putrid this season, not shooting the ball well, not being the kind of efficient offense we're used to seeing from them. We've talked about SMU, another tournament caliber team, being atrocious against quad one competition or NCAA tournament caliber competition. We've talked about UNC and the ups and downs they've had this season. We've talked about Pitt and how they've absolutely cratered since they were a top 10 team in January. That feels like 2 whole seasons ago. The teams in the ACC that have shown flaws have cratered. Louisville simply has not shown those level of flaws. This is not a perfect team, but they have handled their business in a way that those teams simply had not been able to, and they've benefited from that. So if we're going to extrapolate this out to the NCAA tournament, let's say, let's look at how Louisville has done against top 50 competition this season. There hasn't been a ton of that in conference play. So some of this does go back to non-conference, but top 50 teams are typically what you would consider at-large contenders, right? So that's the kind of opponents you're going to face in the NCAA tournament. The disparity between the how Louisville's performed against top 50 and not top 50 is much closer than the disparity between how they performed in non-conference versus conference play. So this top 50 will include that Clemson game, will include Louisville's game against Duke, will include the games they played against the better teams in the ACC. They're 42nd in those games against top 50 on T-Rank, opposed to 23rd against not top 50. Again, some of that has to do with the fact that they do really, really well against teams they should beat, which is a mark of a solid team. You want to make a tournament run, though, you have to perform well against teams you should not beat, that you are as good as, or they're potentially better than you on paper. Offensively, Louisville has been there. They have been able to capture that, and that's one of the Pat Kelsey teams have always been good at, is being efficient offensively, largely because of the pace they play at, the amount of three-pointers they shoot, and the rate they typically make them at. Defensively, there's been a drop-off there. It is worse than they were in non-conference from just a pure adjusted defensive efficiency metric. In non-ACC games, non-conference, they were 99.3. Again, that was about average. 99.9 against top 50 opponents. Again, about average. Big reason for that is the disparity you see there between their shooting percentage and opponents' shooting percentage. And they've done okay, but they have not been the dominant force that we have seen them be in the ACC, or at least the high-end force that we've seen them be in the ACC. I think Louisville can make the ACC semifinals pretty much no problem. Just they keep up the level of play, because the teams they would have to beat to get there are the kind of teams they have not struggled with really to this point in the season. But once we get to that point, and get to the NCAA tournament, that's going to be interesting. And first off, a huge congratulations, and I think it's very telling to Pat Kelsey and his coaching staff that this is the conversation we're having about Louisville right now, and not whether or not this is a tournament team. That was the question before the season, and even the most hopeful Louisville fans were like, yeah, I think we can be a tournament team. That was the bar. Now it is, okay, what can we do once we get there? Which is incredibly impressive and a great year one, again, for Pat Kelsey. Once they get there, that's the interesting question, because they have not played a top 50 team or quad one game since January 21st, when they played at SMU, which again, an SMU team that has really, really struggled against quad one opponents this season, against good opponents this season. And during this hot stretch, Clemson is the only team that Louisville has played and beaten that is a for sure NCAA tournament team. Some of that is just the fact that the ACC is what it is, and they haven't had the opportunities. But when you go 19 games and play one tournament team, and you win that game, which is certainly good, there are questions as to how proven you are. Pat Kelsey has also never won an NCAA tournament game as a coach. He took a good Winthrop team as a 12 seed that lost. Called Charleston teams he's taken the last couple of years have been good, and lost to good teams too. Like, these were not surprising losses. His teams were supposed to lose these games. But this is a coach without an NCAA tournament victory, and a team that has a gaudy record that you could argue has been propped up by a bad ACC. So when they get to the ACC semifinals, when they get to the NCAA tournament, what can they do? Because of how they performed against like teams, and if we're going to go with them projected being a 6 seed in the tournament, I think there's a really good chance that they hold off an 11 seed. Again, depends who that 11 seed is, or remains to be seen, but the teams that project to be on that line are the kind of teams that Louisville has handled throughout ACC play. And I think they have found something during that. So I do feel good about that. Anything beyond that, though, is kind of uncharted water for Louisville. There are teams they struggled with mightily in non-conference play, but that, was December. We have not yet seen them get tested against those caliber teams really since then, because that's just the way the schedule is set up. The game against Duke for them was one of those early games back in December. They have not really been tested. The first chance to see that may be in the ACC tournament semifinals, and that will give us some data as to what we can expect from Louisville in the NCAA tournament. But right now, I still think this is a first weekend team. They're not a team that I'm looking at as one that can make a pretty long run, like a challenge for Final Four, or even make a second weekend. I think making the second round would be considered, best case scenario for this group. But we'll see. We'll see what happens in the ACC tournament. They still have to take care of business to close out the regular season. They still have to get to the ACC semifinals as well. But I think that game and the potential ACC tournament championship game are going to be very important data points for this Louisville team and how we look at them in the NCAA tournament. They have to get there, obviously. Conference tournaments, people have talked about not mattering as much in power conference leagues for teams that are not going for auto bids. It's important for a team like Louisville. It's important for a team like Louisville for that reason. We need to see how they perform against that level of competition. I think Louisville needs to see how it performs against this competition as well.